So in this lesson, we're going to distinguish between two types of research of collecting data: observational studies and experiments, and the types of conclusions that can be reached from each of these. We're also going to point out things that need to be in place in order to draw these conclusions. So again, as with the earlier lesson, it's crucial you do the textbook reading, as this video is not going to cover every single aspect and every vocabulary word that you will need to know for the AP. I'm just going to hit the highlights and the parts that are generally confusing for students. So let's first look at the definitions of the two types of studies. We have observational study and experience. In the observational study, we're observing some characteristic, some variable of a sample, where the researchers, they do not impose a treatment. They don't attempt to influence the responses at all. They just sort of look to see what's happened. And then we have an experiment, sometimes called a designed experiment. Researchers impose a treatment to the sample or samples. Example 1. Suppose that a researcher wanted to know if there was an association between adults who took a vitamin supplement and their overall health. They sent out surveys to doctors to fill out about their patients, anonymously of course, with the question, do you regularly take a daily multivitamin supplement? They then compared this with their overall score on a health survey that was also given. If they found that those who take a daily multivitamin scored significantly higher on the overall health survey, can they conclude that taking a multivitamin causes one to be healthier? First, what kind of study is this? It's an observational study, right? The researcher did not impose this multivitamin. They did not randomly split this into two different groups and assign one group to take a multivitamin and another group not to. They just observed. So this is an observational study. So can we conclude that taking a multivitamin causes one to be healthier? So that's a key word there, causes. No. There's another huge variable, or many variables at play here. So perhaps people who take a multivitamin are overall healthier. They lead a healthier lifestyle with diet and exercise, and taking a supplement like a multivitamin is just something they do as a part of their daily regimen. So this is called a confounding variable, or in this case, confounding variables. So we can never prove causal relationships with observational studies. So make sure that you get that. That's key here. So let's formally define that confounding variable. A confounding variable, a variable that is associated with both the explanatory and response variables. Because of the confounding variable's association with both variables, we just don't know if the response is due to the explanatory variable, in this case the multivitamin that we just looked at, or due to the confounding variable. So when asked to identify possibly confounding variables, you need to be able to explain how it's related both to the explanatory variable and how it affects the response variable. So in our multivitamin example, we don't know if the response variable, overall health, is the result of the use of the multivitamin or some other variable like diet and exercise, or something as simple as people who take a multivitamin can afford them and have money to take care of themselves. It bears repeating, we cannot draw cause and effect with observational studies. So another way to put this is correlation is not causation, or association is not causation, which you may remember from the module we looked at with linear regression and correlation. So in order to reach a cause and effect conclusion, we need to run an experiment, or a designed experiment, or a controlled experiment. So example 2. A psychologist is studying the effect of drug and electroshock therapy on subject ability to solve simple tasks. The number of tasks completed in a 10-minute period is recorded for subjects randomly assigned to two groups. Half were assigned to a group who received electroshock, and half of whom did not receive electroshock. Let's identify the explanatory and response variables. Even if the study does not ask you to do this, the question does not ask you to do this, it is still highly recommended that you do this. So what is the explanatory variable? It's whether or not the subject received electroshock. We're seeing the response variable, the number of tasks completed in a 10-minute period. So was this an observational study or an experiment explained? So notice what's different about this study. So there's a treatment, electroshock, that's being imposed by the researcher. So with experiments, we can reach cause and effect conclusions. So if the experiment is well conducted, that is. We can apply some terminology from Module 1 here with regard to the variables. So we have an explanatory variable and a response variable. First, let's go ahead and answer this question. Was the study observational or experiment? Because of the random assignment to two groups, the imposed treatment and the random assignment, it's an experiment. And again, something else that's important for a well-planned experiment, that you'll recall from the reading is that a treatment be randomly assigned. So this helps to reduce the confounding variables we just talked about. Another important factor, often present in well-designed experiments, is a control group. So when the treatment of interest is withheld from one of the treatment groups, that group is referred to as the control group. So in our case, it's the group who do not receive the electroshock therapy. So let's talk about the 3 principles of experimental design. Some books will list 4. We're going to talk about 3 of them here. The first one is direct control, or sometimes just called control. Direct control, researchers assign treatments to cases, and they do their best to control any other differences in the groups. So they want the groups to be as similar as possible, except for that treatment, so that at the end of the experiment, any difference in response between the groups can be attributed to the treatment and not to some other confounding or lurking variable. Randomization. So researchers randomize patients into treatment groups to account for variables that cannot be controlled. And replication. So the more cases researchers observe, the more accurately they can estimate the effect of the explanatory variable on the response variable. Sometimes pilot experiments start with a smaller sample that may not be representative of the population. So maybe I did a teaching learning experiment with a small sample of students in my statistics class that showed promise. This should be replicated with a larger group of students with different backgrounds and interests, maybe different institutions, different levels of students, and so forth. So often we want to create diagrams to represent these different types of ways we can do these experiments. And so this first one here is called a complete randomized design. So you start with some subjects and you randomize them into group 1 and group 2. You could have more than 2 groups. I'm just showing you one with 2 groups. You apply a treatment. So group 1 gets a treatment, group 2 gets a treatment. And maybe that treatment is no treatment. Maybe that's the control group. And then you compare these results.